The other big title, at least for some of us, for some folks, a game that made me think about classic 90s shooters due to the way the world is built. It's weirdly enough, it's Pokemon ZA. I don't know, Pokemon Legends ZA, like, apostrophe ZA, like pizza, something like that. It could be any of those things. This game is both significantly better visually than prior Switch Pokemon games, yet it also looks about 15 years old.
Yeah.
And Oliver, as our Pokemon man, who covers all of the Pokemon, what were your thoughts on this, and how does it compare to the prior entries?
Yeah, so I actually think this looks, by recent Pokemon standards, it looks sort of okay. Like, just the way that it looks like at a glance, it looks like a plausible city. You look around, there are buildings, the draw distance isn't like obnoxious, there are shadow maps, it kind of looks sort of in its place, it looks okay. And I think you really do have to go back to Scarlet and Violet to really get a sense of the visual progression between Pokemon titles here, because that game really just did look quite awful. I think a lot of the problems came down to scope, like the textures could be very low resolution. There was a lot of texture tiling, especially in the environments when you're looking at like distant buildings, sure, but distant bits of terrain, there was like super obvious, just ugly repeated textures everywhere. There was some like pretty ugly normal mapping on buildings, very low resolutions there. Very awful draw distance, I would say, with a lot of pop-in and a pretty bad use of like reduced rate animations as well. So you'd like have characters that were maybe, 20 feet, 30 feet afield, and they'd be running at like quarter rate, or flags that were rendering and were animating at like 2 frames per second, 2 cycles per second, whatever. It just, obviously the Switch is CPU and all this stuff, it makes sense, but like it was just so jarring in that context of an open world Pokemon game. But I think in part because of the scope of ZA, and in part because of probably some better art decisions and probably some technical upgrades as well, a lot of those issues aren't evident. Like, there is a lot of plain texture tiling, but it's for elements like building sections and windows and things like that, where it's kind of natural, it's not obnoxious, it looks fine. The textures tend to be a little bit higher resolution here. Maybe there's, some repetition there, but they do look pretty high resolution. They do look pretty good. The quality of the art in general looks, I would say, a lot better than in Scarlet or Violet. Poppin isn't as much of a problem. Like, in some of these scenes, even though it's a city area, you can actually see grass that's drawing further afield, a lot further afield than in Scarlet and Violet, which actually makes some of those more naturalistic, like park areas inside of the city, look better to the eye there. The NPCs are drawing further, and I went through this trailer very carefully, and I couldn't spot any signs of like reduced rate animation, which is a big issue in Scarlet and Violet that's not present here, at least not present in these kind of curated shots. Now, in the final game, maybe we'll get a bit of a different impression there, but at least it doesn't seem to be as big of an issue. But yeah, I think ultimately this looks better because of a change in art style, a little bit, a change in setting, and being shown in a curated trailer. But like John kind of mentioned, there are some big issues with it in terms of, we can kind of highlight the improvements, but there are some big issues. Probably the biggest issue to me is just like the buildings, which are composed of very little actual geometry. Like, even at like LOD 0, if there is a LOD system for those buildings, they're really flat, and like super flat, unbelievably flat, like just a couple polygons there, it looks like.
Dude,
yeah,
that's the thing, is like watching this trailer, especially when you get to like 2 minutes 14 seconds, I have this like flash where I'm like, man, this looks like a Sandy Peterson map from Doom 2 or like Rise of the Triad, where you just have these like large, tall, flat surfaces representing buildings stretching way up into the sky, which is the same repeating texture slathered across it.
Yeah.
It's a very specific look that feels weirdly claustrophobic. It looks like 90s style, like shooter geometry.
Yeah.
Like it's a sector-based shooter or something.
To me, it really
which is
felt
funny.
Like one of those remasters of a PlayStation 2 title or a 3DS title or a title from a more distant generation like that, where you just have like the model geometry is basically unchanged, but they've kind of slathered high resolution art over everything. And it just looks like there's a bit of a discordance between the relatively, image quality that's better, texture quality that's better, but geometry that's like super plain and super boxy and looks like out of a game from 20 years ago easily, right? It's just very bizarre.
Yeah,
dude, it straight up reminds me of Midnight Club 1 on the PlayStation 2.
Yes. Yeah.
But so
Yeah. I
I know
just
you're
want
going to play it, Alex. What do you think?
I'm going to play this game, as we all know. But I'm happy Oliver did detail areas where it is artistically more sound than the previous entries, specifically, and how there wasn't great evidence of animation decimation in the distance, which I thought looked. There were a couple of examples. I remember a video that Tom did was also really bad once. But here, the one thing that it does bother me a bit is that every single shot, we're not going to run this through our tools, I don't think, but every single shot was really dropping tons of frames. So none of they do a lot of what almost looks like manual developer cam pans of the city where someone just like hit left on the stick or right on the stick. And each one of those is unsmooth. And we're talking about a 30 FPS base presentation, so that means we're seeing frame drops into the 20s. Given the art and everything and the plainness of it all, that is a bit of a shame, especially when I watched these back to back with the Metroid Prime trailer. So it was really jarring from a performance standpoint, also texture quality standpoint, where Metroid Prime seemed like way ahead. But there are some aspects of this which make it heavier to run. It is a large open city, even if simple, and it also does use real-time shadows everywhere, it looks like, which is not something the Switch is probably very good at in general anyway. It just seems like mainly characters and buildings and some smaller objects. Obviously, stuff like grass doesn't get shadows. But yeah, or even some like I'm looking at this bridge here. It doesn't even have shadows. But still, I just think I would really love to see. I know people are saying that they've been taking more time on these games, but there's still aspects of them where I find them like questionable as to why it's running the way it is.
There's also just still some awkward stuff with like I think the animation is kind of poor quality and characters are kind of snapping around and that doesn't look too great either.
No, it doesn't.
In terms of performance, the performance is not good, like Alex mentioned. But also the image quality is kind of questionable. It looks like maybe a post AA, maybe something in there, but the counts I was getting, which presumably come from the game in docked mode, were coming in around 720p, which is, not, again, it's Switch One. What can you say? But it's not ideal, I'd say. And I am pretty confident this is Switch One. I don't think anyone is saying this is possibly on Switch 2. I'd probably expect this would arrive on Switch 2, but it would probably have some high-res rendering, maybe a 60 FPS mode. Hopefully they're able to clean up some of these issues. But yeah, in general, Game Freak and the Switch One are not really a match made in heaven, especially with some of these newer titles that have more expanded scope rather than just like the remasters and remakes of their older titles. And I think that this shows some evidence of that friction still, even if it is like not as bad. Like it is considerably improved over their prior 2022
Agreed.
title. Yeah.
I mean, I actually quite like the character models in this. I think
that's
they're
a high
expressive.
point.
The sort of textured on face where they like blink eyes and have expressions as they, emote. I think that generally looks pretty good. And the Pokemon themselves are all well modeled. So they have the base assets looking nice there. It's just those environments are still rather poor. I mean, I genuinely look at this and it feels like a mid-budget game designed for like the first year of PS3.
Yeah.
It just has that look to it. Especially when you add in like the way the textures work with those like very obvious normal maps combined with the super low res shadow maps. I just feel like we actually saw better looking stuff even during that initial year of the Xbox 360.
Oh yeah,
like
by far.
Stylistically, they're worlds apart, but you look at something like Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter Raw, which had a gigantic city map with shadow maps and everything, and that looked so much more technically impressive even today than this, even though, again, stylistically, they're very, very different. And that's just kind of, that's a bit of a bummer that they've never been able to wrap their heads around this and sort of figure this out. So it is what it is, though. I mean, like you said, Oliver, despite these shortcomings, it does ultimately look better than the previous games in many ways. And it also seems like it might run better despite the constant performance hiccups evident in the trailer. So I will say this, like stylistically, if they were able to boost the res and frame rate significantly on a Switch 2, it will be a reasonably nice looking game. Nothing impressive, but it will like not be an ugly looking experience, I would say. They could at least somewhat rescue it. But when you look in the context of the Switch or even Wii U, like you look at Breath of the Wild, for instance, which is still like light years beyond this, or even I was just playing it for a video, Xenoblade Chronicles X, which is so far beyond what they've done here.
Oh my goodness.
All the right, and that was initially also a Wii U game, and now we have it on Switch running at a much higher resolution, often around 1080p even, and it's just, yeah, these guys, I don't know, it's very, very strange. But that's the life of developing Pokemon. You're beholden to the release schedule of whatever the Pokemon company defines, I guess, and you just have to crank this stuff out. And they've never had the chance to really rebuild their tools in a meaningful way to produce better results. So here we are.